Hi, today we're going to do something a little bit experimental. So what I've got is a piece of white paper. It doesn't matter what it is. It can be, mine's a little bit mouldy and a bit chewed by some insects. But you just need to be able to see what you're doing. And what I've done is I've taped down a piece of plastic. Now this can be any plastic as long as it's transparent, and I've used just a piece of plastic that I've got off a roll. You could use a bit of plexiglass, you could use a bit of glass even, because we're going to print off this. And the reason why I've stuck it down onto this paper is so I can see what I'm doing. If I stuck that down onto the surface of my table, which is covered in paint, I wouldn't be able to see what I was painting onto it. So that's why I stuck it down. I just stuck it down with a bit of tape. If it's a piece of glass, then you don't need to do that. You don't need to stick it down. This was just on a roll, so I had to stick it down to keep it flat. Okay. The next thing to do, some people recommend that you lightly sand your plastic or your glass. I don't do that, but if you want a better tooth, as they call it, a grip for your paint, you can do that. And then the next thing is to take some fairy liquid, washing up liquid, and paint a thin coat of liquid onto, just use a normal brush and just paint it onto your surface, a thin coat. And then wash your brush out really well and leave it to dry off. Okay, and the reason why you do that is so that the paint, because we're going to use a watercolour, so that it will adhere to the surface of the plastic or glass, whatever you're using. I'm going to use watercolour, so I'm just using a normal watercolour set here, water and brushes, and I'm just going to do something really abstract. Now, if you wanted to do something realistic, then have a go just quickly at doing your abstract first, and then you can move on to doing something more detailed. The reason why I say about doing something a bit more abstract is just to sort of concentrate on how the watercolour adheres to the plastic, how it moves, how it dries. So we're looking at the technique of this rather than the final product, if you see what I mean. All right, so just get used to it first. So just pick up a series of colours from your watercolour palette. Again, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter how you put them on either. So, you know, they can go on thick, they can go on thin, they can run into one another. You could do lines, swirls. You could do sort of basic flower shapes if you wanted to. You can see it's quite bubbly, and that is because of the fairy liquid that you've put on. So again, choose a few different colours. Maybe work with the more intense colours that you've got in your palette. So I've got a phthalo blue here. I'm just going to put a bit of that down because it's really, really strong. And the reason why I say this again is so that you can get used to sort of the application and how the different strengths come through once you get it onto your paper. Okay. Consider a rhythm going through your abstract artwork. If you wanted to sort of blend a couple of colours together, then you could. You know, you could make it look like the sky, you could make it look like water. It's up to you really what you do with this at this stage. What other colours shall I use? I've got blues and purples. Let's try a bit of alizarin crimson. So again, I'm just continuing to use these sort of swirly marks. Maybe I'll have some sort of circular form down here. And you know, the idea really is to maybe produce 2 or 3 of these, or even more if you really enjoy it. Get used to the technique. How much washing up liquid do you need to apply? How much paint do you need to apply? How long do you need to let it dry? All of those things. You know, art is about experimentation. And we don't do a lot of experimentation in these classes. So it's a really, really lovely opportunity to have a bit of a play. You can do this with acrylic paint, but keep the acrylic paint quite thin. Almost use it like watercolour. So water it down quite a lot. You'll find that if the paint is quite thick on the surface, it tends to sort of stick to the surface and not remove itself, because acrylic has got plastic in it. It tends to form a stronger bond, but it won't do that if you don't put too much. If you add a lot of watercolour, should I say, water, should I say. Okay, so I'm just going into my orange. My orange is a bit dirty in my watercolour set. I need to sort of refill it a bit, so it might not be a bright orange. It's like a burnt orange, you can see that, can't you? So I'm just going to sort of blend some larger areas of colour together. And I quite like the little dots that are created by the washing up liquid. Now you can see that that's running down there and a lot there now, and that's just simply because I've got a lot more water in this orange, but also because my page is not flat. So you know, those are elements that you have to control. Let's just move that. See, you can work into it, it's no bother. I'm quite liking a bit more purple, I think. So I'll pick up some more purple. Now the idea is that you're supposed to leave this to dry before you do anything else with it. So go and have a cup of tea, or go and walk the dog, whatever you have to do. Let it dry off. I wouldn't necessarily advise using a hair dryer with this, mainly because you will disturb the sort of patterns that are being created by your brush. Okay, so I think, I don't know, I like that. So tempting to keep working and working and working into these lovely abstracts that you create. So much fun. Put some nice music on while you're doing this. It's quite mindful an exercise to get into. Okay, maybe a bit more down here. Bit more in there. It doesn't matter if you have gaps necessarily, but you do want to control the image if you can a little bit. This area here is still running, so I'm just going to put some more colour in there like that, just to make that central section a little bit more controlled. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. So I'll let that dry off, and then I'll come back and I'll show you how to print it off. Okay, so once you have dried off your plastic watercolour, then you need to take a sponge and a piece of watercolour paper or mixed media paper, but it must be something that will absorb water. So acrylic paper, oil paper, that won't do. But mixed media paper, watercolour paper will. And then you just take some water, clean water, and your sponge, and you want to wet the surface of the paper. Now you can do this by just immersing your paper into a washing up bowl or something like that of water. And the best thing to do is to wet the front and the back so that the water absorbs fully into the paper. Okay, so you don't want it like dripping, running everywhere, but you do want it to be wet. Okay, and then all you do is you move your paper away, bring your image back, and then you lay paper down on top of your image and press it gently down into the watercolour paint. So you're making a print. Okay, so the next thing to do is to get a rag or an old sock or something like that, and all you're doing now, you really must not move the paper, but what you do want to do is press so that and you're pressing gently, you're not really pressing hard, you're just making sure that the watercolour paper or mixed media paper has contact with what's underneath. And you can sort of keep checking to see what's happening. Now this again is very much down to experimentation. So it's down to how much water you've got on your paper, how dry the atmosphere is, how much time you leave it on the surface, how hard you press. So again, you know, have a play and really enjoy the process and make notes. So on the back of each print, make a note of how long it took and how wet the paper was. What type of paper did you use? What watercolour did you use? How thick it was? How, you know, what brushes did you use? How much fairy liquid did you put down? A lot of these processes, like printmaking, are down to making notes and recording your failures and enjoying the processes, you know. So you never know what you're going to get because it's all magic under here. So, okay, right. I think that's worked as much as I would like it to work. Because again, you know, you could leave this on until it dries, but I want to take this off just to show you what result I'm getting from this picture. Okay, so ready, 1, 2, 3. So peel it back really gently, and you'll be able to see, before I show you the print, how much watercolour is left on the image itself, okay, on the plastic. And this is what you get. So you can see that the image has blurred quite a lot. You can't really see the circular, well, you can see them a bit, but not much. So what you're getting is a sort of very soft version of what you get on the plastic. Now again, like I said, that will depend very much on how much water you put on your paper and so on and so forth. Okay, so that is my first piece. Now, what would you do with that? So you could use this as a background, you know. You could easily go back in, you could let this dry, or you could work on it wet and you could take your watercolours and work into it. You could even apply more paint to your plastic surface and then take a second print. You know, there's so many things that you could do, but why not use this as a background for a picture, whether it be a floral picture or maybe some butterflies, or it really could be anything. If you look out of your window, currently I've got some lavender, so I'm going to use some purples, and I'm just going to use this too. Now, while the paper is still wet, which my paper is still wet, you'll find that this paint will move slightly on the surface because it's still wet. So if you wanted to wait for it to dry, you could do, but it's up to you. So I'm just going to put in some lavender flowers using this purple tone, and I'm just going to have them coming down in a rhythm. I'm going to leave part of this background open. I'm going to have them coming down in a rhythm down this sort of central section here. So again, this is an opportunity for you to play with colour, pattern, shape, texture, but using that background that you've already created. I'm just going to reach and get a rigger brush. Now again, with this kind of layering technique, so you've used a bit of printmaking and now you're using a bit of painting, you can play with ideas. And now you're using different brushes to create different marks into your background. So keep it fresh just for the moment. Don't go into too much detail or worry too much about what it is you're producing. You're just producing almost like an abstract representation of something. Like I said, this is what I can see in front of me at the moment through my studio window. So go with that. If you can see something outside from your window that you can enjoy and incorporate into your image, then do use it. Use what you can see. Now behind the lavender there are some pumpkins. They're only small at the moment, but they've got these beautiful leaves. So I'm going to just try and replicate some of those leaf shapes using this really vibrant acid green. And the leaves on the pumpkins are very much, they're very like almost like lily shapes. Really beautiful, sort of heart shapes at times. Depends how old the leaf is. But again, really beautiful pattern. And they have these great big long tendrils coming down. Again, quite acid green. So I'm going to put some yellow into the colour that I'm using. And they have these sort of really beautiful tendrils. So again, just working with what I can see. I'm just creating a pattern of sorts. And they have these lovely, I'm going to carry on with this rigger brush because it does give you sort of a nice feel. It's almost like drawing with a pencil. So the flowers are like tubes with tops on like that. So I'm just drawing the outlines really of these forms coming down. And obviously these flowers will turn into pumpkins. I have got a few growing. Just a few veins there to follow. It's just started to rain. Okay, so that's not bad actually. That's quite a nice image happening there. I'm just going to take some of this purple again and just add in. And now the dots, the surface will behave differently because it's drying off on me now. So I can put some more sort of defined marks into these lavender heads. Maybe have a few more sort of coming down. My lavender is quite dark at the moment, but if you wanted it to be a bit lighter, you could add a little bit of white into the paint. Okay, so I'm going to leave that for now. I'm just going to let it dry off, and I might come in and add some more texture into some of the lavender heads and maybe put some extra pumpkin details on and things like that. But you know, the idea is just to have a play with these techniques. Use the printmaking technique to create a beautiful washed background. Experiment with drying times, thicknesses of paint, and so on. Okay, and then you know, you can either leave the background as it is, use it as an abstract image, and maybe do a series of 4 or 5 with different colours. That'll be really lovely as well, and you can put them in a frame. They have these multiple windowed frames these days, don't they? So that would be a really nice idea. Or you can work into it, you know, you could do something more detailed. It's really up to you to have a play and see what sort of things you can come up with. I'll put some additional ideas on at the end of this tutorial so that you can have a play with form and shape and colour. Okay, I hope you enjoy that. If you've got any questions, then just ask me again. You know, the technique is quite simple. A piece of plastic or glass, a little bit of fairy liquid on it to aid the watercolour adhering to the surface. Watercolour, let it dry, apply a piece of damp paper, and then just see what you come up with. Okay, it's a fun thing to do. One of the things that I enjoy doing, and I've got a pile, let me just get them 1 second. I used a similar technique using large sheets of watercolour paper and just then cutting them up into squares or rectangles, and I just use them over and over. I use them for making cards, I use them for backgrounds for paintings, I stick things on top of them. You know, there's all sorts you can do with these little almost like swatches of, I mean, look how beautiful that is just as it is. You know, you don't need to work on top of that. It's just amazing, the colour, just enjoying the colours and the sort of accidents that happen where white paper gets left behind and all this colour running down from it. So have a bit of a play. Okay, I hope this inspires you, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.